The conversation we are about to have today is not comfortable, and it is not meant to be because comfortable conversations are how people avoid reality. This is one of those moments where the noise fades, the slogans stop working, and people are left alone with the outcomes of the choices they made over decades. This video is not about attacking anyone, and it is not about celebrating anyone's pain, but it is about telling the truth that many people feel but are afraid to say out loud. If you stay to the very end of this video, you are going to understand why an entire social contract quietly collapsed without a headline, why one group walked away without asking for permission, and why the calls to bring them back are not working. Before we get into it, make sure you like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell and select all if you want more Angry Guy content and you want to get every single video the moment we release it. If you want to protect yourself financially and learn how to safeguard your assets while growing your wealth, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, where you can learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto the right way. The academy is linked in the description of this video, so go check it out now while it is still available. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to support the channel directly, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. That support keeps this content alive and independent, and it is genuinely appreciated. Now, let us talk about what is actually happening. Not the version filtered through headlines, not the version polished for social approval, and not the version designed to protect feelings at the expense of truth. Over the last several decades, society was sold a very specific story, a story that promised freedom without cost, independence without trade offs, and fulfillment without responsibility. That story told women that traditional roles were a trap, that reliance on men was weakness, that partnership was optional, and that career achievement would provide not just money, but meaning, stability, and long term security. Men were told they were unnecessary, outdated, or replaceable, that their presence was conditional, and that their value was something to be constantly justified rather than assumed. Many men listened, not because they were bitter, not because they were angry, but because when someone repeatedly tells you that you are not wanted, the most logical response is to leave quietly and stop participating. For years, this separation was framed as progress, as empowerment, as evolution. Women were encouraged to pursue careers above all else, to delay family indefinitely, to view commitment as a risk rather than an investment, and to treat independence as the highest possible virtue. Men were told to step aside, to do better, to accept blame for structural issues they did not create, and to keep proving their worth in a system that increasingly offered fewer rewards. What was never discussed honestly was that every social shift comes with consequences, and consequences do not care about intentions. You can believe you are doing the right thing and still arrive at an outcome you did not expect or want. Fast forward to the present moment, and something very different is unfolding in real time. Increasing numbers of women are expressing exhaustion, frustration, and regret, not because work itself is evil, but because the promise that work alone would be enough turned out to be incomplete. Many women are discovering that long hours, constant pressure, and career advancement do not automatically translate into emotional security, family, or partnership. Inflation has risen, housing costs have surged, food prices have climbed, and the cost of simply existing has increased dramatically. Independence sounds empowering until it collides with economic reality. And the reality is that surviving alone in an expensive system is far harder than the slogan suggested. At the same time, many men who were told they were unnecessary took that message seriously and adjusted their lives accordingly. Instead of chasing approval, instead of competing in a dating market that felt increasingly transactional, instead of trying to meet standards that shifted constantly, they chose solitude, peace, self development, and financial self preservation. They reduced risk, they simplified their lives, they focused on stability rather than validation. They stopped trying to rescue systems that did not want them, and in doing so, many found something unexpected, which was calm. Not happiness in the loud sense, not victory, but a quiet sense of control over their own time, money, and emotional energy. Now, a strange reversal is happening. Voices that once dismissed men are now calling for partnership. Narratives that celebrated independence are now questioning whether complete self reliance was sustainable. There are countless videos circulating of women openly admitting they are tired, overwhelmed, and struggling to make ends meet alone. Some express fear about aging without a partner. Some talk about wanting a family later in life and realizing biology does not negotiate with ideology. Others speak openly about financial stress and the desire for shared responsibility. These are not isolated moments. They are signals of a broader realization that the social experiment had costs that were not fully acknowledged at the beginning. What makes this moment so tense is not that women are reflecting, because reflection is healthy, but that many of the men they are now turning toward are no longer available in the way they once were. Those men did not disappear, they did not vanish. They simply redirected their lives. They built routines that did not depend on romantic partnership. They structured their finances to minimize risk. They learned to live with less chaos and fewer expectations placed on them. And when someone has built a life around stability and peace, they are understandably cautious about re entering dynamics that once drained them. This is where the misunderstanding grows. Some assume that men are holding grudges or seeking revenge. That is not what is happening for most. The reality is more mundane and more powerful. When someone adapts to a new environment and finds that it works, there is little incentive to return to a system that previously caused stress, confusion, or loss. Walking away was not a protest, it was an adjustment. And once an adjustment becomes a lifestyle, it is not easily reversed by emotional appeals or social pressure. There is also a deeper economic layer to this story that cannot be ignored. For years, many people assumed that the state would fill the gaps left by declining family formation, that social programs, subsidies, and institutional support would replace the functions once handled within households. But the state is not an unlimited resource. Budgets are strained, systems are overextended, promises made decades ago are colliding with fiscal reality. When inflation rises and public support becomes uncertain, individuals are forced to rely more heavily on personal networks and partnerships. That realization is arriving late for many who were told they would never need anyone else. This is not about blame, it is about cause and effect. Choices made in one decade shape realities in the next. Delaying family for career growth may make sense in your 20s, but it carries different implications in your 40s. Prioritizing independence feels empowering until you are facing rising costs alone. Encouraging men to disengage should not be surprising when they actually do. None of this requires anger to explain, it requires honesty. Men are not returning en masse because the incentives have changed. In the past, partnership often came with clear roles, mutual dependency, and shared long term goals. Today, many men perceive higher risk, less stability, and fewer guarantees of reciprocity. When the cost benefit analysis no longer favors participation, rational people opt out. This is not cruelty, it is self preservation. And it mirrors the same logic that encouraged women to prioritize themselves in earlier decades. The most difficult part of this conversation is acknowledging that time is not reversible. You cannot rewind social trends and pick different outcomes once the window has passed. That does not mean individuals are doomed, but it does mean expectations must adjust. Wanting a traditional outcome after rejecting the structure that supported it creates tension. Wanting partnership without shared values creates friction. Wanting rescue in a system where everyone is struggling creates disappointment. And what we are witnessing now is not a sudden shift, but the delayed consequence of long term messaging. Feminism promised choice, and choice was delivered. What was not emphasized was that every choice closes other doors. Choosing career focus often meant postponing family. Choosing independence often meant bearing costs alone. Choosing to dismiss men as unnecessary often meant losing access to partnership when circumstances changed. These are not moral judgments, they are practical outcomes. And men, on the other hand, adapted to a world that told them to expect less. They lowered expectations, they disengaged emotionally, they built walls not out of spite, but out of necessity. Over time, those walls became habits, and those habits became identity. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Asking them to return now without addressing the underlying structural issues is unlikely to succeed. Peace, once found, is not easily surrendered. There is also a generational component that deserves attention. Younger men watching this unfold are learning from the experiences of older men. They see the risks, they observe the instability, they absorb the lessons without needing to experience the pain firsthand. That means the trend is not self correcting in the short term, it is reinforcing itself. Each story of regret, each public admission of exhaustion, each financial breakdown serves as data for those still deciding how to structure their lives. At the same time, women are facing a cultural reckoning that was delayed by optimism and reassurance. Many were told they could have everything without sacrifice. Reality is reminding everyone that trade offs exist. That does not mean there is no path forward. It means the path looks different than promised. It requires accountability, realism, and mutual respect rather than entitlement or nostalgia for a past that no longer exists. The internet amplifies these moments because it thrives on emotion. But beneath the viral clips is a quiet recalibration happening across society. People are reassessing what they value. Men are asking whether participation makes sense for them. Women are asking whether independence alone is fulfilling. Institutions are struggling to adapt, and the space between expectations and reality is where frustration lives. What is often missed in this conversation is that no one wins when social trust erodes. A society built on adversarial narratives eventually runs out of cooperation. Rebuilding that trust is not about guilt or shame. It is about aligning incentives with reality. It is about acknowledging mistakes without weaponizing them. It is about recognizing that partnership requires mutual benefit, not obligation. For men who walked away, the decision was often quiet and internal. There were no marches, there were no announcements, just a gradual withdrawal from systems that no longer felt fair or rewarding. That quiet exit is precisely why the return is not happening. You cannot rally people who left peacefully for their own well being by telling them they owe something. Obligation is not a foundation for healthy connection. As the story continues to unfold, more people will be forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The idea that you can design a society without considering human nature has always been flawed. The belief that biology, economics, and psychology can be overridden by slogans has never held up long term. What we are seeing now is not collapse, but correction. Corrections are painful because they expose assumptions. The path forward, if one exists, will require humility from everyone involved. It will require women to acknowledge that some advice they were given was incomplete. It will require men to decide whether re engagement is worth the risk under new terms. It will require honest conversation without hostility. And it will require accepting that not every story has a perfect resolution. This video is not about telling anyone what they should do. It is about explaining why what is happening makes sense, even if it is uncomfortable. When people say men are not coming back, they are not issuing a threat. They are stating an observation. The conditions that once drew them in no longer exist in the same form. Without addressing that reality, calls for change will fall on ears that have already learned to live without noise. When you strip away the online outrage, the reaction videos, and the viral clips, what remains is a slow collision between ideology and lived experience. For decades, people were encouraged to think in abstractions rather than outcomes. Freedom was framed as the absence of obligation rather than the presence of purpose. Independence was sold as an end state rather than a phase. And very few voices were allowed to ask what happens after the slogan stop working and real life takes over. One of the most powerful myths that took hold was the idea that time was endlessly flexible, that biology was negotiable, and that emotional needs could be postponed indefinitely without consequence. Like people were told to focus on themselves first, to delay commitment, to build careers, to travel, to explore identity, and that partnership and family could simply be slotted in later when it was convenient. That message sounded reasonable on the surface, especially in an era of economic growth and cultural optimism. What was not emphasized was that time compounds whether you acknowledge it or not. Opportunities narrow, energy shifts, priorities change, and the things you defer for too long often do not wait patiently. As the years passed, many women did exactly what they were told. They worked hard, they climbed ladders, they invested in education and credentials. They proved competence in environments that rewarded productivity but rarely offered stability or loyalty in return. At the same time, the dating landscape changed dramatically. Commitment became optional. Casual arrangements replaced long term planning. Shared goals were replaced by individual optimization. Men who might once have been building toward marriage and family were now navigating a world where expectations were unclear and risks were high. In that environment, hesitation became rational. Men were watching closely. They saw relationships increasingly framed as conditional contracts rather than partnerships. They saw marriage described as optional at best and risky at worst. They observed legal and social systems that seemed to penalize long term commitment while rewarding disengagement. Over time, many concluded that the safest path was to reduce exposure altogether, not out of fear, but out of calculation. When the rules of the game are unpredictable, the smartest move is often to stop playing. What makes the current moment so stark is that economic pressure has removed the illusion of endless choice. Rising costs force prioritization. You cannot pursue everything simultaneously when resources are limited. High rent, high food prices, healthcare costs, and general instability have made it clear that solo survival is expensive. The narrative of effortless independence collapses quickly when bills arrive every month without pause. This is where many women are finding themselves reassessing past decisions, not because those decisions were immoral or foolish, but because the context has changed. There is a sense of shock that accompanies this realization. People expected the future to be more forgiving. They assumed there would be time to adjust later. Instead, they are confronting a reality where adjustment requires sacrifice, compromise, and acceptance of limits. That shock is often expressed emotionally because emotions are how humans process loss of expectation. When you believed one outcome was guaranteed and discover it is not, grief follows, even if no one did anything wrong intentionally. The public nature of this grief is new. Social media has turned private reckoning into public performance. Videos of people expressing regret, exhaustion, and fear circulate widely, not because they are rare, but because they resonate. They reflect a shared experience that many feel but have not articulated. At the same time, these expressions are being consumed by men who have already opted out, reinforcing their decision to stay disengaged. Each display of instability confirms their belief that peace is found elsewhere. This creates a feedback loop. Women express distress and ask for partnership. Men observe the distress and perceive risk. Men remain withdrawn. Women feel abandoned. The gap widens. Without intentional effort to rebuild trust, the cycle continues. Trust cannot be rebuilt through pressure or guilt. It requires demonstrating that the environment has changed in meaningful ways. Words alone are insufficient. Another critical element in this conversation is the role of expectations placed on men. For decades, men were told to improve themselves, to do better, to earn more, to be emotionally available, to be supportive, to adapt. Many did. They invested in self improvement, they worked on fitness, finances, and emotional regulation. What they often found was that the goalpost kept moving. Improvement did not guarantee appreciation. Stability did not guarantee partnership. Effort did not guarantee reciprocity. Over time, that erodes motivation. When men choose solitude now, it is not because they hate relationships. It is because solitude offers predictability. It offers control. It offers a direct connection between effort and outcome. You work, you save, you invest, you improve, and you see results. Relationships, by contrast, increasingly feel like environments where effort and outcome are disconnected. That is a rational deterrent. The concept of being needed versus being wanted also plays a role here. Men were told repeatedly that they were not needed. That message was framed as liberation for women, but it had an unintended effect. Being wanted is flattering, but being needed gives purpose. When men were told they were optional, many internalized that and adjusted accordingly. Now, when economic and emotional pressures create a renewed sense of need, it clashes with years of messaging that discourage men from seeing themselves as providers or protectors. There is also an age component that cannot be ignored. As people move into their 30s, 40s, and beyond, priorities shift naturally. Health becomes more salient, companionship becomes more valuable, legacy becomes a consideration. For women who delayed family formation, these realizations can arrive suddenly and intensely. For men who have structured their lives around independence, the same realizations may arrive, but lead to different conclusions. They may seek companionship without cohabitation, connection without obligation, or choose to invest in friendships rather than romantic partnerships. The idea that someone will come to rescue you from economic hardship is particularly fragile. No one is coming to save anyone in a system under strain. Men understand this acutely because they have long been expected to be self sufficient. They have learned not to expect rescue. When they hear appeals framed around financial relief or shared expenses rather than shared vision, it reinforces their reluctance. Partnership built on necessity rather than desire feels unstable. This is where the state enters the picture. For years, institutional support expanded to compensate for declining family cohesion. Assistance programs, subsidies, and social services were expected to fill gaps. But institutions operate within budgets. As costs rise and revenues fluctuate, those supports become less reliable. When people realize that the safety net is thinner than expected, they look for alternatives. Historically, family and partnerships served that role. Replacing it with bureaucracy was always a gamble. Men observing this landscape see increased demands and reduced guarantees. They see systems asking for contribution without offering security. That makes withdrawal an attractive option. You cannot force participation in a system that does not align incentives. You can only make participation worthwhile again. Another uncomfortable truth is that narratives matter. For decades, popular culture framed men as obstacles rather than partners, as problems to be managed rather than allies. Even when those narratives were meant to address genuine issues, they often painted with a broad brush. Many men who had done nothing wrong felt targeted nonetheless. Over time, they disengaged not out of resentment, but out of fatigue. Being constantly on trial erodes goodwill. Now, attempts to reframe the conversation face skepticism. Men are asking what has actually changed. Are expectations clearer? Are risks reduced? Is respect mutual? Without concrete answers, words ring hollow. Trust rebuilds slowly and collapses quickly. It cannot be commanded. Women, on the other hand, are grappling with a loss of promised outcomes. That loss can manifest as anger, sadness, confusion, or denial. Some blame men, some blame society, some blame themselves. Most are simply trying to make sense of a reality that feels different from what they were prepared for. That emotional turbulence is understandable. It deserves empathy, but empathy alone does not solve structural problems. One of the hardest lessons in life is that you can follow advice sincerely and still end up dissatisfied. Advice is shaped by context, and contexts change. The advice that made sense in an era of growth and optimism may not hold in an era of scarcity and uncertainty. Recognizing that does not require assigning villains, it requires adaptability. The men who walked away adapted early. They adjusted expectations downward. They accepted solitude. They found fulfillment in smaller, more controllable domains. That adaptation now looks like indifference to calls for re engagement. It is not indifference to people, but indifference to systems that have not proven themselves worthy of trust. As we move forward in this discussion, it becomes clear that there is no simple reversal available. You cannot simply declare a return to tradition without rebuilding the conditions that made it functional. You cannot ask people to take risks without addressing why those risks were abandoned in the first place. You cannot shame people into sacrificing peace once they have found it. The cultural conversation will likely intensify before it resolves. Economic pressure accelerates honesty. People will continue to speak openly about regret, exhaustion, and desire for connection. Men will continue to weigh those expressions against their lived experience. Some will re engage selectively, many will not. The outcome will be uneven and deeply personal. What matters most is clarity. Understanding why things unfolded the way they did prevents repeating the same mistakes under a different banner. Romanticizing the past or demonizing the present solves nothing. Honest assessment creates the possibility of new arrangements that reflect reality rather than fantasy. This moment is a reckoning, not a punishment. It is the result of accumulated choices interacting with material conditions. Those conditions are not moral, they are economic, biological, and psychological. Ignoring them does not make them go away. Acknowledging them is the first step toward navigating the future intelligently. One of the quiet truths that rarely gets discussed is that most people do not actually want endless choice. Choice sounds appealing in theory, but in practice, it creates anxiety, comparison, and paralysis. Commitment, by contrast, reduces options but increases depth. It channels energy rather than scattering it. For years, commitment was framed as confinement, especially for women, while detachment was framed as empowerment. Men were told to accept this framing or be labeled insecure. Many complied publicly while disengaging privately. Over time, the cultural script lost credibility, but it continued to be repeated because questioning it came with social cost. As people age, the psychological need for continuity becomes stronger. You want your past decisions to connect meaningfully to your present life. When that connection feels broken, people experience a kind of existential discomfort. That discomfort is what you are seeing expressed online. It is not simply about dating or money. It is about realizing that a life built around short term optimization does not automatically produce long term coherence. When coherence is missing, People feel unmoored. Men who opted out early avoided some of this turbulence by simplifying their goals. They accepted that certain experiences might not be available to them, but they also avoided the emotional whiplash of constantly changing expectations. There is a quiet discipline in choosing less. That discipline is often mistaken for apathy, but it is closer to realism. When you stop expecting systems to reward you fairly, you stop being disappointed by them. Women, on the other hand, were often encouraged to expect fairness from systems that have never been fair to anyone. Corporate environments reward output, not loyalty. They extract energy and offer compensation, but they do not provide belonging. For some, that trade off felt acceptable early on. Later, when the novelty faded and the grind remained, the absence of deeper connection became more apparent. This is not a failure of ambition. It is a mismatch between what work can provide and what humans ultimately need. Another layer of this issue is the erosion of interdependence. Healthy societies balance independence with reliance. No one thrives in total isolation, but no one thrives when entirely dependent either. The cultural push toward radical independence disrupted that balance. It framed reliance as weakness and self sufficiency as virtue, without acknowledging that self sufficiency has limits. Men were told to be self sufficient because no one owed them anything. Women were told the same, but with the promise that independence would feel empowering rather than lonely. The reality is that sustained independence is exhausting for most people. The concept of rescue has been misunderstood on both sides. For some women, the desire for a partner who provides stability is framed as wanting to be saved. That framing ignores the fact that partnership has historically been about mutual support, not rescue. For men, the fear of being used as a solution rather than chosen as a partner is real. They want to be valued for who they are, not for what they can fix. When economic stress enters the conversation, that fear intensifies. This is why appeals that focus on hardship rather than shared vision often backfire. Men hear need, not desire. They hear obligation, not opportunity. After years of being told they were optional, being told they are suddenly necessary feels less like validation and more like risk. Rebuilding attraction requires more than acknowledging struggle. It requires demonstrating compatibility, respect, and alignment of values. There is also the issue of accountability narratives. When outcomes disappoint, people look for explanations. Some explanations externalize blame entirely, others internalize it excessively. Neither extreme is helpful. The truth usually sits in between. Cultural messaging influenced decisions, but individuals still made choices. Economic conditions shifted, but preparation mattered. Biology remained constant, but expectations ignored it. Recognizing all of this simultaneously is uncomfortable because it leaves little room for simple villains. Men who are content in solitude are often accused of selfishness. That accusation misses the point. Choosing peace is not an attack on anyone else, it is a response to lived experience. If participation in a system consistently results in stress or loss, withdrawal is rational. You cannot demand sacrifice from people who no longer believe the sacrifice serves a meaningful purpose. Women expressing regret are often accused of entitlement. That accusation is equally unhelpful. Regret is a natural response to unexpected outcomes. Many genuinely believed the promises they were given. Acknowledging regret is not the same as demanding restitution. It is an attempt to process reality. The problem arises when regret turns into expectation that others should reverse their own adaptations to accommodate it. This is where conversations break down. Each side feels misunderstood. Men feel blamed for not returning. Women feel abandoned when they expected partnership to still be available. Without shared language to discuss trade offs honestly, both retreat into defensiveness. Online spaces amplify the most extreme voices, making constructive dialogue harder. The economic dimension continues to exert pressure regardless of cultural debates. Inflation does not care about ideology. Housing costs do not adjust based on sentiment. Food prices do not respond to hashtags. As these pressures increase, people are forced to make pragmatic decisions. Some will seek roommates, some will downsize, some will relocate, some will pursue partnerships out of necessity. Others will double down on independence and reduce expenses. There is no single correct response, only responses that align with individual tolerance for risk and discomfort. One thing that becomes clear is that the idea of having everything at once was always unsustainable. You cannot maximize career, leisure, independence, and family simultaneously without extraordinary resources or support. Most people must prioritize. The cultural failure was pretending otherwise. That pretense delayed difficult conversations until they became unavoidable. For younger generations observing this, the lesson is stark. They are watching older cohorts navigate regret and withdrawal. They are adjusting expectations earlier. Some are opting out of traditional paths entirely. Others are seeking more conservative arrangements sooner. The long term impact of this shift is still unfolding, but it suggests that the pendulum may not swing back to where it was. It may settle somewhere new. Men who walked away are not a monolith. Some remain open to connection under specific conditions, others are content alone. Some pursue non traditional arrangements. What they share is a reluctance to re enter environments where expectations are unclear and risk is asymmetric. That reluctance will persist unless conditions change materially. Women facing the limits of independence are also not a monolith. Some adapt by redefining success. Some seek community rather than partnership. Some recalibrate expectations around family. Some pursue relationships with renewed intentionality. What they share is a confrontation with reality that cannot be resolved through affirmation alone. The idea that the state will compensate indefinitely for declining family formation is increasingly questionable. Public systems rely on participation, productivity, and trust. When those erode, capacity shrinks. Individuals who assumed external support would always be available are now reassessing. This reassessment is not ideological, it is practical. In all of this, it is important to remember that history is full of social experiments that promised liberation and delivered complexity. Outcomes are rarely as clean as intentions. The challenge is learning from those outcomes without doubling down on denial. Denial prolongs pain, adaptation reduces it. Men finding peace in solitude should not be mocked or pressured. Women reassessing life paths should not be shamed. Both are responding to the same underlying forces. The conflict arises when each expects the other to undo years of adaptation without addressing why that adaptation occurred. As the series of conversations continues, it becomes increasingly clear that solutions, if they exist, will be local and personal rather than universal. Broad narratives have lost credibility. Individuals will negotiate their own terms. Some will find alignment, many will not. That unevenness is uncomfortable, but it is honest. The most productive question going forward is not who is right or wrong, but what arrangements are actually sustainable under current conditions. Sustainability requires realism, not nostalgia. It requires accepting constraints rather than resenting them. It requires recognizing that peace is valuable and should not be sacrificed lightly. We are living through the consequences of deferred trade offs. The bill has arrived and it cannot be ignored. How people choose to pay it will shape their lives for decades to come. Understanding that does not make the situation easy, but it does make it navigable. The alternative is clinging to stories that no longer fit and wondering why frustration persists. For many men, the moment of disengagement was not dramatic. It did not come from one bad experience or one argument. It came from accumulation, a series of signals that suggested effort would not be met with appreciation, that commitment would not be met with security, and that expectations would continue to expand while rewards became less certain. Over time, the emotional math stopped working. When men realized that opting out reduced stress and increased control over their lives, the decision became self reinforcing. Peace became evidence that the choice was correct. For many women, the realization has been slower and more disorienting. The path they were encouraged to follow emphasized self fulfillment through achievement, but achievement is a moving target. There is always another milestone, another promotion, another credential. Unlike family or partnership, which have natural rhythms and endpoints, career ambition rarely provides a sense of completion. When external validation fades or becomes routine, the question of what it all adds up to becomes harder to ignore. That question is often postponed until external pressure forces it to the surface. The emotional reactions people display online are not simply about missing companionship, they are about confronting a gap between expectation and outcome. When people say they feel misled, what they often mean is that they were given partial information. They were told what a choice would give them, but not what it would cost them. Costs deferred feel like betrayals when they finally arrive, even if no one intended harm. Men watching these reactions are not indifferent to them, but they are cautious. They understand how quickly empathy can turn into obligation. They understand that stepping back into dynamics without structural change risks recreating the very conditions they left. The desire to help does not outweigh the desire to preserve stability once that stability has been hard won. This is not callousness, it is learned restraint. Another factor that complicates re engagement is the erosion of shared narratives. In the past, people entered relationships with broadly similar expectations about roles, responsibilities, and long term goals. Those narratives provided a framework that reduced uncertainty. Today, those shared assumptions are weaker. People enter relationships with highly individualized expectations shaped by online discourse, personal experience, and shifting norms. Negotiating all of that requires emotional labor that many are no longer willing to invest. Men who value predictability look at this landscape and see risk. Women who desire partnership look at the same landscape and see scarcity. Both perceptions are valid given their positions. The problem is that scarcity and risk create opposing incentives. Scarcity pushes people to reach out, risk pushes people to pull back. Without a mechanism to realign incentives, the standoff persists. Economic pressure amplifies these dynamics. When resources are abundant, people tolerate inefficiency and uncertainty. When resources are constrained, tolerance disappears. Decisions become sharper, priorities narrow. What once felt negotiable becomes non negotiable. This is why economic downturns often accelerate social change. They remove buffers that allow people to avoid hard choices. The idea that emotional fulfillment can be separated from material conditions is appealing but unrealistic. Stress undermines patience. Financial insecurity strains relationships. Independence feels empowering until it collides with exhaustion. Partnership feels appealing until it threatens autonomy. Navigating these tensions requires honesty about limits. Pretending they do not exist only deepens frustration. One of the least discussed consequences of prolonged independence is the recalibration of emotional thresholds. People who live alone for long periods become accustomed to controlling their environment. They regulate noise, schedule, and obligations precisely. Reintroducing another person into that system requires compromise. Compromise feels heavier after long periods of autonomy. What once felt normal now feels intrusive. This is not a flaw, it is adaptation. Men who have adapted in this way often find that the cost of reentry outweighs the benefits unless the partnership offers exceptional alignment. Average relationships no longer justify disruption. This raises standards, not out of arrogance, but out of experience. Peace sets a high bar. It is difficult to give up once achieved. Women adapting later face a different challenge. They are adjusting expectations downward while confronting time constraints. That combination creates urgency. Urgency can distort decision making. It can lead to settling or rushing, which further destabilizes outcomes. The pressure to act quickly conflicts with the need to choose carefully. This tension fuels anxiety and emotional expression. Social media magnifies these pressures by creating constant comparison. People see curated snapshots of others' lives and measure themselves against them. Men see narratives that confirm disengagement. Women see narratives that heighten fear of missing out. Both are exposed to extreme cases that skew perception. The result is heightened emotion and reduced nuance. There's also a subtle shift in how value is perceived. For years, value was framed primarily in terms of independence and productivity. Emotional labor, caregiving, and stability were devalued or treated as secondary. Now, as people feel the absence of those qualities, they are being reassessed. But reassessment does not instantly restore supply. Skills and roles devalued for decades do not reappear overnight. Men who once might have been eager to provide stability were discouraged from doing so. They were told it was unnecessary or even undesirable. Reversing that message requires more than acknowledgement. It requires cultural support, legal clarity, and social reinforcement. Without those, individual incentives remain misaligned. Another complication is trust erosion. Trust is built through consistency. When narratives shift repeatedly, trust suffers. Men question whether current appeals will endure or whether expectations will shift again once conditions improve. Women question whether men's withdrawal is permanent or tactical. Uncertainty feeds hesitation on both sides. The notion that everything can be fixed through better communication is overly simplistic. Communication matters, but it cannot override incentives. You cannot talk someone into taking risks they have learned to avoid. You cannot reassure someone into ignoring patterns they have observed. Structural issues require structural solutions. For individuals navigating this landscape, the most practical response is realism. That means accepting that not every desire will be fulfilled in the way or time frame imagined. It means distinguishing between what is essential and what is optional. It means building resilience rather than waiting for rescue. These adjustments are not admissions of failure, they are adaptations to conditions. Men choosing solitude are not rejecting humanity, they are choosing manageable lives. Women seeking partnership are not weak, they are recognizing limits. Both responses make sense within the same environment. The conflict arises when either side expects the other to sacrifice adaptation without reciprocation. As the conversation evolves, it becomes clear that the future will not mirror the past. New arrangements may emerge that blend independence with connection in different ways. Smaller households, flexible partnerships, community based support. These models may lack the romantic simplicity of traditional narratives, but they may be more sustainable under current conditions. The challenge is letting go of ideals that no longer fit. Ideals provide comfort, but clinging to them in the face of contradictory evidence creates suffering. Letting go creates space for new forms of meaning. That process is uncomfortable, but it is also necessary. Men who have found peace should protect it thoughtfully, not defensively. Women confronting regret should process it honestly, not destructively. Neither benefits from escalating hostility. Hostility obscures options. Calm assessment reveals them. As economic and cultural pressures continue, more people will reach similar conclusions independently. This is not a coordinated movement. It is a convergence of individual decisions shaped by shared conditions. Understanding that reduces the temptation to personalize what is largely systemic. One of the most underestimated factors in all of this is energy. Human beings have finite emotional and physical energy. Early adulthood often comes with optimism, resilience, and tolerance for uncertainty. As people age, energy becomes more precious. You become selective about where you invest it. You stop chasing validation and start protecting stability. Men who withdrew did so in part because they recognized that their energy was being consumed without producing proportional returns. Women now reassessing their paths are often doing so because they feel depleted rather than fulfilled. Depletion changes priorities quickly. Another important element is the way success has been defined and measured. For years, success was quantified externally through income, titles, and lifestyle markers. Those metrics are visible and easily compared, which made them attractive in a culture driven by performance. What they do not capture well is satisfaction, peace, or belonging. Many people achieved what they were told to aim for and then discovered that the internal rewards did not match the external validation. That realization can be deeply unsettling because it forces a reassessment of identity. Men who disengaged early often simplified their definition of success. Instead of chasing status, they focused on autonomy, health, and financial security. These metrics are quieter, less visible, but more stable. Women encouraged to pursue highly visible forms of success are now grappling with the limits of that model. Visibility does not guarantee support. Achievement does not guarantee companionship. Recognition does not guarantee security. The gap between what is celebrated publicly and what sustains privately is becoming harder to ignore. There is also the issue of delayed feedback. Many choices made in youth do not produce immediate consequences. That delay creates the illusion that there are no costs. By the time feedback arrives, reversing course is difficult. This is particularly true with family formation and long term partnership. The window for certain experiences narrows gradually, not suddenly. When people realize it has narrowed significantly, the emotional impact can be intense. Men who opted out received earlier feedback. They felt stress and disengaged, then experienced relief. The feedback loop was immediate and clear. Women who followed the prescribed path often received positive feedback early in the form of praise and encouragement. The negative feedback arrived later in the form of isolation, fatigue, or anxiety. Delayed negative feedback feels more unfair because it contradicts earlier reinforcement. This asymmetry in feedback timing contributes to misunderstanding between the sexes. Men feel validated in their withdrawal because it improved their quality of life. Women feel blindsided because they did what they were told and still feel dissatisfied. Without acknowledging this difference, conversations devolve into accusation rather than understanding. Another layer that deserves attention is the role of social approval. Many choices were not made purely for personal reasons, but were shaped by what was rewarded socially. Being independent, career focused, and self sufficient earned praise. Questioning that path risked being labeled regressive or insecure. Men expressing discomfort with changing norms risked being dismissed. Over time, people learned to suppress doubts until reality forced them out. Now, those suppressed doubts are surfacing publicly. That public processing is messy, it lacks polish, it is emotionally raw. While it may appear chaotic, it is also a necessary stage of adjustment. People are renegotiating values that were once assumed. That renegotiation is uncomfortable because it challenges identity. Men observing this process often choose distance rather than engagement. Distance allows them to avoid being pulled into emotional turbulence. After years of being expected to absorb and manage emotions without clear benefit, withdrawal feels protective. This is not emotional immaturity, it is boundary setting. And the idea that men are obligated to return because women are struggling misunderstands how obligation works in healthy systems. Obligation without mutual benefit breeds resentment. Sustainable cooperation arises when both parties perceive value. That perception cannot be manufactured through pressure. It must emerge organically from changed conditions. Economic reality continues to exert downward pressure on idealism. When budgets tighten, people cannot afford to live according to abstract principles. They must make pragmatic choices. Some will form partnerships. Others will consolidate resources in different ways. Others will accept lower standards of living to preserve autonomy. None of these choices are moral failures. They are responses to constraints. One thing that becomes increasingly clear is that the expectation of being rescued is incompatible with a world of scarcity. Rescue implies surplus. It implies someone else has enough to absorb your risk. In a strained system, everyone is managing risk carefully. Men who built buffer through frugality and simplicity are reluctant to extend that buffer without clear reciprocity. That is rational behavior under uncertainty. Women expressing desire for partnership are not wrong to want shared responsibility. The challenge lies in reconciling that desire with years of messaging that discouraged interdependence. Relearning interdependence requires humility and patience. It also requires acknowledging past narratives without defensiveness. That process takes time and cannot be rushed. Trust is another casualty of prolonged misalignment. Trust erodes when words and outcomes diverge repeatedly. Rebuilding trust requires consistency over time. Short-term gestures are insufficient. Men who left will watch actions more than statements. Women seeking stability will evaluate whether offers of partnership are genuine or conditional. Both are cautious. There is also a broader cultural fatigue at play. People are tired of being told how to feel and what to value. They want agency over their own lives. That desire manifests differently depending on experience. For some, agency means withdrawal. For others, it means reevaluation. Both are attempts to reclaim control. The future likely holds more individualized arrangements. Traditional timelines will matter less. Roles will be negotiated explicitly rather than assumed. Some people will find satisfaction in non traditional partnerships. Others will build rich lives without romantic involvement. The idea that one path fits all has lost credibility. This shift does not mean connection is dead, it means connection must be intentional. Casual assumptions no longer suffice. That intentionality can be exhausting, but it can also be clarifying. When people choose connection deliberately, it is often more resilient. Men who have found peace should not be portrayed as obstacles to progress. Women confronting regret should not be portrayed as cautionary tales. Both represent adaptive responses to the same environment. Polarizing them obscures the shared root causes. As this conversation continues, it becomes increasingly important to emphasize agency without denial. People cannot undo the past, but they can influence the future. That influence begins with accepting reality rather than resisting it. Acceptance is not resignation, it is the foundation for effective action. The social contract has shifted quietly. Expectations that once held are no longer guaranteed. Recognizing that shift allows individuals to make informed choices. Ignoring it leads to repeated disappointment. Understanding does not remove pain, but it prevents unnecessary suffering. The reality is that no one is coming to restore an earlier version of society. That version depended on conditions that no longer exist. Waiting for its return is a form of avoidance. Adapting to current conditions is an act of responsibility. The sooner that adaptation is embraced, the more options remain available. People often underestimate their capacity to adjust when they stop clinging to promises that no longer apply. Letting go of those promises creates space for new forms of meaning and stability. That process is uneven and personal, but it is possible. This moment is not the end of connection, it is the end of illusion. What comes next depends on whether individuals are willing to engage with reality honestly and shape their lives accordingly rather than waiting for validation from narratives that have already failed them. For a long time, the cultural emphasis was on maximizing individual freedom without equal emphasis on the responsibility that freedom demands. Freedom without responsibility is exhilarating in the short term and destabilizing in the long term. It encourages consumption over construction, experience over continuity, and expression over stewardship. Many people were encouraged to consume life rather than build it. Build your career, build your identity, build your brand. But building a life also means building something that lasts beyond your own impulses. That distinction was rarely highlighted. Men who disengaged early often did so because they sensed this imbalance intuitively. They recognized that the system was asking for contribution without offering permanence. They were expected to invest time, money, emotional labor, and risk, but the return on that investment felt increasingly uncertain. Over time, that uncertainty eroded motivation. When people stop believing their effort will be rewarded proportionally, they stop offering effort. That is not bitterness, it is a rational response to incentives. Women who followed the encouraged path often did so in good faith. They were told that independence would insulate them from vulnerability, that self reliance would feel empowering rather than isolating, and that partnership could be postponed without consequence. For many, the early years reinforced that belief. Careers advanced, income increased, social validation flowed. The costs were subtle and deferred. When they arrived all at once. That sudden reckoning feels overwhelming because it collides with identity. Identity is a powerful force. People do not simply abandon identities that they invested in for decades. When reality challenges identity, people often resist reality rather than revise identity. This resistance manifests as frustration, blame, or denial. You see it online when people insist that outcomes would be different if only others behaved differently. Men are told they should return. Systems are blamed. Society is accused of failure. Rarely do people ask whether the identity itself was built on incomplete assumptions. Men who found peace in solitude often rebuilt their identities around simplicity. They defined themselves by what they controlled rather than what they achieved publicly. Health, routine, financial discipline, personal projects. These identities are quieter and less dependent on external validation that makes them resilient. When calls come to re enter volatile dynamics, those calls threaten not just lifestyle, but identity. That threat is taken seriously. Another critical issue is the erosion of shared sacrifice. In previous eras, hardship was often framed as something endured together. Today, hardship is often individualized. You are told to manage your own stress, your own finances, your own emotions. When partnership enters the picture primarily during hardship rather than during growth, it feels asymmetrical. People want to share success more readily than struggle. When struggle dominates the appeal, enthusiasm wanes. The language used around relationships has also shifted in ways that matter. Terms like standards, boundaries, and self care are important, but when they are framed exclusively in individualistic terms, they can undermine cooperation. Boundaries become walls, standards become checklists, self care becomes avoidance. None of these concepts are harmful on their own, but when they replace mutual adjustment, relationships become negotiations rather than bonds. Men observing this shift see a landscape where everything is conditional: conditional affection, conditional commitment, conditional respect. Conditions are not inherently bad, but when they multiply excessively, they signal instability. Stability comes from shared values that do not need constant renegotiation. Without those anchors, people feel like they are always auditioning. Auditions are exhausting. Eventually, people walk away. Women navigating this environment face a different exhaustion. They are told to maintain high standards while also being flexible, to be independent while also desiring partnership, to succeed professionally while also remaining open to family, to project confidence while admitting vulnerability. These competing expectations create internal conflict. Holding contradictions for long periods drains emotional energy. When that energy runs out, clarity replaces complexity, often painfully. The online discourse surrounding these issues tends to flatten nuance. Short clips reward extreme statements. Algorithms amplify outrage and despair. That environment makes it difficult to process complexity calmly. Men who are content are portrayed as uncaring. Women who express regret are portrayed as entitled. Both portrayals are incomplete. Real life is quieter and more complicated than viral narratives suggest. Economic stress continues to act as an accelerant. When costs rise faster than wages, people feel squeezed. That squeeze reduces tolerance for experimentation. You cannot afford to make choices based purely on ideology when survival requires pragmatism. This is why periods of economic strain often produce cultural conservatism, not necessarily politically, but behaviorally. People prioritize security over expression. Men who simplified early often insulated themselves from this squeeze. Lower expenses, smaller social circles, fewer obligations. That insulation reinforces disengagement. Women who did not simplify face sharper adjustments now. Downsizing expectations is emotionally harder than maintaining modest ones from the start. That difficulty feeds resentment toward those who seem unaffected. Another overlooked factor is that modern life offers endless distraction. Streaming, gaming, online communities, and personal projects can fill time effectively. Men who disengaged did not necessarily become lonely, they filled their lives with alternative sources of satisfaction. When people can meet many of their needs without partnership, the perceived value of partnership changes. It must offer something unique rather than merely compensatory. Women seeking partnership in this environment must compete not with other women, but with peace. Peace is a formidable competitor. It does not argue, it does not demand, it does not criticize. Convincing someone to give up peace requires offering something of equal or greater value. That is a high bar, and it cannot be met through urgency or pressure. And this reality is uncomfortable because it challenges long held assumptions about desirability and leverage. For a long time, scarcity was assumed to favor women. Now, in certain contexts, scarcity favors men who are content alone. Power dynamics shift when one side is willing to walk away permanently. That shift is destabilizing for those who expected different outcomes. It is important to note that not all men are content alone, and not all women are struggling. There is diversity of experience. However, the trend matters because it shapes expectations. Even those who do not fit the pattern are influenced by it. Expectations inform behavior. Behavior reinforces trends. The conversation about blame often obscures the more useful conversation about alignment. Alignment asks whether people want the same things at the same time under the same conditions. Increasingly, the answer is no. That does not mean alignment is impossible. It means it is rarer and requires intentional effort. Men who might consider re engagement often look for signs that alignment is genuine rather than reactive. They look for shared values around responsibility, cooperation, and long term planning. They look for respect that is consistent, not situational. Without those signals, withdrawal remains the safer option. Women seeking connection must navigate between honesty and desperation. Expressing desire for partnership is healthy. Framing it as a solution to hardship is risky. People want to be chosen, not recruited. That distinction matters deeply. Relationships formed under pressure often struggle once pressure shifts. There is also a grief component that deserves compassion. Many people are mourning futures they assumed would unfold naturally. Grief does not always look like sadness. It can look like anger, sarcasm, or withdrawal. Acknowledging grief without weaponizing it is challenging but necessary for healing. As these dynamics play out, society lacks clear guidance because previous guides have lost credibility. People are improvising. Improvisation is messy. Mistakes will be made, but improvisation also allows for creativity. New forms of connection may emerge that better reflect reality. One possible outcome is a greater emphasis on community rather than coupledom. Shared housing, mutual aid, friend networks that function like families. These arrangements may not satisfy everyone, but they may offer stability for those who find partnership elusive. Recognizing alternative forms of belonging reduces pressure on romantic relationships to fulfill every need. Another outcome is a more cautious approach to commitment, slower pacing, clearer expectations, explicit discussions of roles and finances. While this may reduce spontaneity, it may increase durability. When people enter agreements with open eyes, disappointment is less likely. Men who value peace may still choose connection if it does not threaten that peace. Women who value partnership may still find it if they align expectations with reality. Neither outcome is guaranteed, but both are possible when illusions are set aside. The hardest part of this transition is letting go of moral certainty. People want to believe their choices were right and others were wrong. Reality is less accommodating. Multiple choices can be reasonable given different information and incentives. Outcomes vary. Accepting that complexity reduces conflict but challenges ego. As we approach the later stages of this discussion, the emphasis increasingly shifts from diagnosis to adaptation. Understanding why things unfolded this way is important, but it does not change the present. What matters now is how individuals respond without clinging to narratives that no longer serve them. Adaptation requires humility. It requires admitting that some advice was flawed, that some assumptions were incomplete, and that some expectations were unrealistic. Humility is difficult in a culture that prizes confidence, but humility opens doors that certainty closes. This moment is a crossroads. People can double down on resentment and demand others fix their disappointment, or they can reassess, simplify, and build lives that reflect current conditions. The latter path is quieter and less dramatic, but it is more sustainable. As we bring this conversation to its conclusion, it is important to slow everything down and take stock of what all of this actually means at the individual level, because sweeping narratives are easy to debate, but lives are lived one decision at a time. The reality is that most people do not experience social shifts as theories or movements. They experience them as quiet moments of realization late at night, as budget spreadsheets that no longer balance, as empty apartments that feel peaceful one day and isolating the next, as relationships that never formed or dissolved under pressure. This is where ideology fades and lived experience takes over, and it is where honesty becomes unavoidable. One of the clearest lessons to emerge from all of this is that no system, cultural or economic, can permanently replace personal responsibility. Responsibility is not punishment, it is the price of agency. For a long time, many people were encouraged to believe that responsibility itself was optional, or that structures could absorb the consequences of individual choices indefinitely. That belief created a false sense of security. When structures weaken, responsibility returns abruptly, and those unprepared feel overwhelmed. This is not cruelty, it is gravity. Men who stepped away early often did so by accepting responsibility in a different form. They accepted that they might not have families. They accepted that they might not receive validation. They accepted solitude as a trade off for peace. That acceptance reduced internal conflict. Women who delayed similar acceptance are now encountering it under pressure, which makes the adjustment feel harsher. Timing matters when it comes to acceptance. Early acceptance feels empowering. Late acceptance feels like loss. Loss deserves to be acknowledged honestly. Many people are grieving futures they assumed would unfold naturally. They are grieving the idea that effort would always be rewarded in predictable ways. They are grieving the belief that time was abundant and forgiving. Grief is not weakness, it is the mind adjusting to reality. Suppressing grief only prolongs confusion. Processing it allows clarity to emerge. Clarity, however, often requires letting go of comforting illusions. One of those illusions is the idea that someone else is obligated to fix the consequences of your choices. That belief creates entitlement on one side and resentment on the other. Healthy relationships are not built on obligation. They are built on mutual desire and aligned incentives. When desire is replaced by necessity, fragility follows. Another illusion is that moral correctness guarantees favorable outcomes. You can believe you made the right choices and still face difficulty. Reality does not reward virtue points. It responds to alignment between actions and conditions. Accepting this does not invalidate values, it grounds them. For men who found peace in solitude, the challenge moving forward is not to become hardened or dismissive. Peace can turn into isolation if guarded too aggressively. The goal is not withdrawal from humanity, but selective engagement. It is possible to protect stability while remaining open to connection under the right conditions. Doing so requires discernment rather than fear. For women confronting regret or exhaustion, the challenge is to avoid turning reflection into self condemnation or entitlement. Regret can inform better decisions without defining identity. Independence does not have to mean isolation. Partnership does not have to mean surrender. The task is to redefine success in ways that integrate reality rather than resist it. The broader culture will likely continue to argue about who owes what to whom. Those arguments generate noise, but little progress. Progress happens quietly when individuals adjust expectations, simplify lives, and pursue stability over validation. These adjustments rarely go viral. They do not attract applause. They do, however, produce calmer lives. Economic conditions will continue to shape outcomes, regardless of cultural debates. Rising costs will force prioritization. Scarcity will reward prudence. Excess will become harder to sustain. In this environment, those who accept limits early will fare better than those who resist them. Limits are not enemies, they are guides. There is also an opportunity hidden inside this moment, though it is rarely discussed. When illusions collapse, authenticity becomes possible. Relationships formed under clearer expectations may be fewer, but they may also be more durable. Lives built with fewer assumptions may be simpler, but they may also be more peaceful. Community may reemerge in unexpected forms. Meaning may be found in places previously overlooked. This does not mean everyone will be satisfied. Life does not guarantee satisfaction. It offers trade offs. The mistake of the past was pretending otherwise. The opportunity of the present is choosing trade offs consciously rather than inheriting them blindly. Men are not returning en masse because they are not running from pain. They are protecting peace. Women are not expressing regret because they are weak. They are confronting reality. Both responses make sense within the same environment. Framing one as villain and the other as victim obscures the truth that both are adapting to constraints they did not fully anticipate. The state will not save anyone from the consequences of long-term trends. Institutions are strained. Promises are conditional. Expecting rescue from above delays necessary personal adjustment. This does not mean compassion disappears. It means responsibility becomes more localized. The future will likely be uneven. Some will form families later than expected, some will not. Some will build strong partnerships under new terms. Some will find fulfillment alone or in community. None of these outcomes invalidate the others. What matters is that choices are made with open eyes. The most dangerous response to this moment is denial. Denial keeps people waiting for conditions that may never return. Denial turns time into an enemy rather than a resource. Acceptance, by contrast, allows movement. It does not guarantee happiness, but it restores agency. Agency is the common thread here. Men exercised agency by walking away. Women are exercising agency by reassessing. The next step is using that agency intentionally rather than reactively. That means fewer emotional decisions driven by fear and more deliberate decisions driven by values. Values matter, but they must be matched to reality. Valuing independence means accepting solitude at times. Valuing partnership means accepting compromise. Valuing peace means rejecting chaos. Valuing growth means tolerating discomfort. These are not slogans, they are costs. This conversation has never been about celebrating anyone's struggle or condemning anyone's choices. It has been about explaining why things unfolded the way they did and why the current responses make sense. Understanding does not erase pain, but it prevents confusion from compounding it. If there is one takeaway to carry forward, it is this: no one is coming to restore a world built on assumptions that no longer hold. Waiting for that restoration wastes time and energy. Building a life that works now under current conditions is the only reliable path forward. Men who value peace should continue to protect it wisely, not defensively. Women who seek partnership should pursue it intentionally, not urgently. Everyone should reduce reliance on narratives that promise outcomes without cost. Reality is not cruel, it is consistent. As you reflect on everything discussed here, ask yourself, what parts resonated and why? Ask yourself, which assumptions you are still carrying that no longer serve you? Ask yourself, what kind of life you can build with the information you now have, rather than the information you wish had been true. I want to know what you think about everything we talked about in this video. Do you agree with what was said? Do you see these patterns playing out around you? Leave a comment and share your thoughts, because this conversation matters more than people realize. And like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.